We go live to the mountains of Ukraine for Joseph Lindsley. Joe, you out for a hike today?
Not yet. It's pouring rain right now, but a good afternoon from the very green Carpathian Mountains of southwestern Ukraine. And I took the train in from Lviv this morning, and here I will not hear any air raid alarms, only on my phone. Pretty remote location, only the wolves at night, and right now the sound of the falling rain and the distant mountain streams. When you get to the train station here, you take an open-air Jeep way up into the mountains. It feels like a nice refuge in this time of war. And it's a chilly day. It's about in the 50s here. And I was realizing over the weekend in Lviv, Ukraine's climate it's a very lovely climate. Very rarely do you have in much of Ukraine days that get above in the summertime, get out of the 80s. Lviv is often in the 70s. And I think that's another reason why people have fought over it for so long. It's such a great climate for growing things and for living. And it really is a pleasant place. Last night, I was at a cafe in Lviv with the volunteers of the Frontline Kitchen, people from France, Germany, USA, Netherlands, the UK, really all over. And they had just finished their shift of preparing food for the soldiers. They make 20,000 meals a day in their tiny little kitchen in Lviv. And I was talking with a German couple. I said, why, what was the thing that that made you decide to come to Ukraine? And the woman said, well, we're kind of misfits back home. We felt out of place, like we weren't doing enough. And she said, no, here they do not feel like misfits. But she told me that they were in a bar in Munich in their hometown, and they were arguing with a Serbian. A lot of Serbs have supported Russia, and a Serbian who said that the Russian and Ukrainian languages were the same. And this woman knew that wasn't true, but at that moment she realized, she needed to experience Ukraine for herself. And instead of arguing with someone in a bar in Munich, why not come here and actually help? And so that's the story that brought them here to help for almost a month to make meals for soldiers. And while we had about a dozen people volunteers from that cafe, volunteers from the Frontline Kitchen at that cafe, and then we were joined by a real hero, Aiden Aslan. He's a British warrior, and he early on just a few weeks into Russia's full-scale invasion in Mariupol, he was captured and he was sentenced to death on June 9th, 2022 by the so-called authorities of that Russian-backed breakaway region of the Donetsk People's Republic. They sentenced him to death, and along with three others. And then on September 21st, thanks to the work of the government of Saudi Arabia, there was a prisoner exchange, and he was freed. So just to sit next to someone who actually survived being in a Russian prison, but also someone who thought he was going to be executed in mere days, was pretty extraordinary. And he came back. He's back here to Ukraine in Ukraine to help. And what was also extraordinary is, this guy Aiden is a hero, but he treated the volunteers who are but the volunteers who are here to cook, he treated them as equals. Even though everyone, it's equal to come here to help to prepare food as it is to fight in the front lines. And it's really great to see that type of solidarity, especially after, I think, the drama we had on Saturday. Saturday was a day of high alert. In the Saturday evening, a beautiful evening in Lviv, I was at an outdoor cafe with friends. Some of them had just been in Odessa, where they had been one block from one of the recent strikes. All the glass in the house where they were staying was broken. And so people were a bit nervous. Some people stay above ground and life continues. Others were nervous, and we moved to an underground medieval restaurant. But there were reports of missiles flying all over for a couple hours. And it was pretty nerve-wracking. Missiles turning toward Kyiv, and now they're turning toward Lviv. And it was really hard to know what was happening, including we had reports that the Russians had launched that pretty scary hypersonic Kinzhal missile, which can pretty much only be stopped by the American-made Patriot missile battery. And there was hours of confusion. Lviv was not hit in the end. When the all-clear alarm sounded, it still took some time to figure out what had happened. The Russians did hit two seemingly critical sites. There's a Ukrainian helicopter engine manufacturing firm called Motor Sich. Sich is an ancient Cossack word for sort of a group of warriors and people that live together. And the company Motor Sich, some of their premises or factories, and we don't know if these were still in use or not in the wartime, but the Russians hit Motor Sich properties, it seems, outside of the city of Zaporizhia and in the city of Khmelnytsky. And these were direct targets, it seems, with these Kinzhal missiles, which the Russians, they don't have a lot of them, but they use them when they want to be extremely precise. And what's curious is this Motor Sich company people that were paying attention to Ukraine for years would know about this, because in about 2016, under President Poroshenko, there were negotiations from the Chinese aerospace firm Skyrizon to purchase Motor Sich. And some people in Washington thought this was dangerous. Kyiv, in a court in Kyiv, said this was a risk to Ukrainian national security. The Ukrainian SBU actually raided Motor Sich's headquarters, and they accused them of an enemy plot against Ukraine. And as we heard in the testimony last week from Hunter Biden's former business partner, the Hunter Biden and the stepson of John Kerry, who was Secretary of State, and others in their firm were helping the Chinese through their firm Skyrizon try to purchase Motor Sich. And so this has been an item of contention. People concerned about national security, people in the defense business for several years, but it was back in the news last week. And then simply days later, the Russians have two very precise strikes on the Motor Sich plants. I think that's pretty curious.
Yeah. You know, Joseph, I marvel at how you and the people of Ukraine go about daily life and enjoying a weekend there under the constant threat of missile and drone attacks. I was listening to Chris Christie talk about his recent visit in Ukraine, and he discussed the atrocities there. I mean, the torture before the killing of Ukrainian soldiers and the kidnapping of children. It's horrifying. Absolutely.
And, Chris Christie was in Bucha in the Kyiv suburbs, where there was, when that was liberated early on, such scenes of atrocity and the dead bodies everywhere. And it's important, I think, every world leader that has come to see that, whether it's the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, or now Christie, they really see how evil this threat is and are sort of redoubled in their efforts to oppose it. And, I think that's part of the reason why I'm in the mountains now. Just 2 days without air alarms can do wonders. But there's also been some good news that in the Crimean Peninsula on Sunday, we had reports that Ukrainians had used these British-made Storm Shadow missiles to hit two key bridges. And there's not many access points from the Crimean Peninsula to the mainland. And if the Ukrainians are able to cut the Russians off, they could cut off the Russian supply efforts in southern Ukraine, where the counteroffensive is happening. So we do see some positive movement there from the Ukrainians, and that is thanks to those British Storm Shadow missiles, which the UK, unlike the US, has given Ukraine permission to hit targets in Crimea, to hit Russian targets in occupied Crimea. So we see some good things there, and Lithuania has pledged air defense to Ukraine because, as we saw over the weekend, Kyiv is well protected with the Patriot missile batteries, but there's not enough Patriot missiles to be all over this huge country. There's not enough for Odessa or for these cities in the middle of the country. And so there still is there is a great need for stronger air defense in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Bob, I meant a lot of people were commenting after Friday's talk. They appreciated hearing the history of how the Kievan Rus came from what is now Stockholm in Sweden. And I forgot to mention that the word Rus in the Scandinavian languages means to row. The people who rowed, they were Vikings, and they rowed down to Kyiv. And the Finnish word for Sweden is Ruotsi. They preserved the idea that the Rus came from that region, and the Finns, unlike almost every other country, do not call Russia Russia. They have some other name, Virgin, or something totally different. So they recognize that the Rus people did not come from Moscow, but they came down to Kyiv from Scandinavia, and Moscow has been trying to claim that heritage for many centuries, but it's not their heritage.
Yeah, interesting. Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine, I look forward to you painting some idyllic mountain scene pictures for us tomorrow, Joe.
Indeed, Bob. Until tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал? Well, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне? Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чьей ты стороне?